Hey guys, Philosopher here, and today I've got my guide for the Scourge event. This is based on the testing that I did in the test center over the weekend. Obviously, not a lot of time to do extensive testing. They basically made this available to envoys for a short period of time. So, all of this is potentially subject to change, although we're very close to the event going live, so I don't think that much will change before it goes live. I will tell you, I did get this video out a little later than I would have liked because Scopely changed at the very last minute the date and time in which we could make these available. Very unprofessional and disorganized and disrespectful in my opinion, but that's where we're at. So what I decided to do is focus instead of going through and showing you what it looks like, because you're going to see that soon enough anyway. I decided to focus on what I can tell you that might help you do better in this event. Some of the strategies that I saw being used both by myself and from talking to some others who did it. Also just, what team compositions that I think make sense and how you need to plan out your run. So I'm going to go through kind of a lot of analysis here and get into the weeds. And so we'll get right into it. One thing I will just say as a starting point is that you already can see in-game the leaderboard. And I do want to just say, this is a game mode in which we're all effectively competing against each other. We all have serious concerns about cheating and so forth on the leaderboard. There's already been a lot of that in Avenger Tower. And what I will say is, this is a game mode that you're going to have to really, first of all, plan out your run and set a goal for yourself of what you want to achieve. You're going to have to constantly check your score and see how you're doing on this leaderboard to try to climb up. You're also, I think, going to be in a situation where you're going to have to put a lot of time into this event if you want to do well. Unless you just have a mega account and you're not really maximizing. In other words, 500 people are going to get a 7-star Morgan Le Fay. That's what this means. So this is 20 times 15 shards plus the 410. Basically, you're going to get a 7-star Morgan Le Fay if you're in the top 500. So if you're, somebody with a top 20 account in the game, might be able to coast to getting a 7-star Morgan Le Fay. But for most people, if you are trying to maximize the size of the legendary you get, as a practical matter, you're going to have to run this event over and over and over. Let me explain why and how that is all going to work. And so the first thing that you're going to have to, that's going to determine your score on this leaderboard is the difficulty level. The difficulty levels we've already seen in a blog, and I just pasted them here so you get a sense of it. And I will just tell you that these are the recommended gear tiers. They're still the same when you go into the test server. They look exactly the same as this, but I think they're a little deceiving. So difficulty 7, which says recommended gear tier 16, felt really easy to me with gear tier 15 characters. So I was using a roster where everything was standardized. 7 yellow stars, 4 red, and the T4s were all done. And, the gear tier 15 characters, even without 6, 7 red stars that many of us have on key characters, difficulty 7 felt easy. So I think, certainly people are going to be completing difficulty 8 when it gets to live. I imagine there's going to be people who run this enough times that they'll figure out how to beat difficulty 9. Who knows? But the long and short of it is I think a lot of end game kind of players are going to be in this area. And if you're a mid game player, you're going to be, trying to duke it out somewhere in these other areas, with the big divider being whether or not you have Web Warrior, you're able to do a level of this event that requires either Web Warriors or Dark Hunters. So let's go through the Scourges. I'm going to show you all the Scourges here. I originally thought about spending a lot of time analyzing each one, but I feel like that would be a 20-minute video in and of itself. But what I'm going to do is just talk to you about how these work. One thing is that you're going to see you're going to figure this out very quickly when the event starts, that the score that you get is largely based on difficulty level, and you can add to it with Scourges. But the amount the amount of points that are added by these Scourges are very small compared to the difficulty level. So as a practical matter, if you can beat difficulty 8, you're not going to want to run difficulty 7 with a lot of Scourges instead. So realistically, what you're going to be doing is trying to climb up difficulty level. And when you get to a difficulty level that you just, you can beat, and that's you basically you're slammed by the one above it, then you'll start playing around with different scourges. All of these scourges suck to some degree or another, but some more than others. There's more. We're going to go through pages of these because there's so many of them. And what I'm going to do is, instead of giving you my initial impressions of each one, because I will tell you, I did not have the time this past weekend to test every one of these out, but I will just tell you that ultimately what's going to happen, in my opinion, is, let's say you get a score, you're in difficulty 8, you're able to complete that, and you get your score there, and you're trying to bump it up higher with Scourges. The way that you're probably going to be able to do that to increase your score is by picking Scourges that reward you for choosing a team that is not impacted by them. In other words, that you can work around. So, for example, on this page, the ones in yellow here all can be worked around. So, for example, when a player character gains stealth, they gain taunt. Well, other than Miles, who you're going to obviously have to run with the Web Warriors, you could just not run any other stealth characters, and that's really not that big of a deal, right? Or these ones about when a player character gains ability energy, some really bad stuff happens to them. They either get slow or you get piercing damage dealt to them. I think that that's referring to getting ability energy, from another character, as opposed to just getting it regularly with your turn. If it is the ability energy from other characters, you could just not bring energy batteries, right? Don't bring, for example, Captain Sam, right? So if you just put that character on the bench and you can win without him, if you have a broad enough roster that you can win without Captain Sam, then you can get the benefit of those Scourges. The one at the bottom, to me, is actually a gimme. I'm going to explain more about this, after we get past these Scourges, but you're basically going to redo these over and over and over and over again until you don't die. So as a practical matter, something that happens when one of your actual characters, not summons, but actual characters dies, is something that probably won't happen. By the way, these numbers at the right are the number of points that it shows in game that they're worth. It kind of translates into leaderboard score. It's not exactly clear to me how, but these are basically the relevant impact, relative impact of each Scourge. Here's the next several. The two at the bottom, to me, are ones that you can gain. Once again, if you're not gaining ability energy from external sources, then that's not an issue. And, if a player character dies, then that is obviously going to be a huge problem if all the energy or the enemies are gaining ability energy. And what that really means is you can't use characters that have summons. Of course, the problem there is Doom. So can you get through the global section? Can you get the villain through the villain section without Doom? If you can, then you can select that Scourge. I will say Dormammu is really key to getting through, I would say, the villain section without Doom if you want to have hope of doing that. Here's the next set right here. All of them suck pretty bad. Some more than others, okay? Some more than others. And by the way, I will just say that all of these Scourges are really going to test your understanding and knowledge of buffs and debuffs in this game. Like, in other words, getting speed buff, speed up a lot of players, and be like, it's not that big of a deal. But that makes your enemies gain turn meter 50% faster. It's really bad. So, these are the two that I think you might be able to get around. Obviously, if you're not relying on debuffs, if the enemies gain immunity for a turn, it's not the end of the world. It's really going to create a problem for, Web Warriors and Dark Hunters on those two key nodes. But, possibly you could, if you could figure that out on the other nodes, you could just try to, bring in characters that aren't as focused on debuffs. Similarly, if you're not relying as much on healing, if you use other sorts of damage damage mitigation, that might be an issue, like defense up, deflex, etc. Although going to be pretty hard to get through this without healing. And then here's the next page here. Really, the only two on this page that I think are possibly ones you could game a little bit is, once again, gaining of ability energy or leaving out characters that block. Right? If you don't bring in Captain Sam or Doc Ock, or characters that block, that maybe that's potentially a Scourge that you can select. The rest of these are going to be pretty tough, and you would be surprised how much difficulty they add. I'm not sure how well balanced or thought through these were by Scope, because some of when I screwed around with it, some of them were very, very hard. And then this is the last page, and to be very blunt, there was none of these that I think you could easily game, and they're all just really bad. They're very, very tough. Some of them may not seem like a big deal to you, like, oh, on enemy turn they gain offense up. That's not a big deal. That's 50% additional damage incoming, and that's also on 50% more focus, so they're going to be landing all their debuffs. Very, very tough to deal with. All right. Now let's just talk about strategies, because I think that's really what people are more interested in than sitting here, hearing me talk about each individual Scourge. So let's just say it as a starting point that, as I mentioned before, you want to focus on your difficulty level before you worry about Scourges. So you're going to, let's say, be difficulty level 6, 7, 8, wherever you end up stopping. And you're going to say, okay, I get rolled when I get to the next difficulty level. Then you can start screwing around with the Scourges, because that's going to be your final resting place unless you invest a lot more in your characters. By the way, that's, of course, what Scopely is encouraging you to do with this entire game mode here. I wouldn't worry much about efficiency points. So there's something that they do have called efficiency points, which are similar to something they're going to be doing in Crucible, where basically you get some little extra points tacked onto your score for each node, depending on how few turns you beat it in. In other words, if you take a turn that has lots of sustain, or a team that has a lot of sustain and a lot of healing, then you get fewer efficiency points than if you bring a team in like the Eternals and just blow everything up. I think it's silly, but that's a scoring system that they seem to like. The bottom line is the number of points from efficiency are so low that, for as far as I can tell, they're just not even worth worrying about. They're like a rounding error. You're going to get millions, million plus points from from a run, and you're just talking about thousands that you're going to get from efficiency. And so my focus would be on how you perform in the nodes, and focus on surviving and having your cooldowns ready so you can get through runs at higher difficulty and higher Scourges. And the bottom line in terms of how to think of this event is it's basically like Dark Dimension. It's, in fact, when we did some data mines, it was really based on the Dark Dimension game mode. And so a lot of what I will call basic things about how Dark Dimension works apply. And so, first of all, you can just rerun the same node over and over and over until you get perfect RNG. Anybody who watched me, streaming in Dark Dimension 4 or 5 knows that I would just sort of start nodes over and over and over again. I did that less in Dark Dimension 5. In Dark Dimension 4, this was before I was really doing a lot of content creation, I would literally just restart the same node over and over and over and over, just trying to land a particular stun or get a particular dodge or get my ability energy to go to the right character or whatever. And I guess all I would just say there is, you're going to have to do a lot of that here, because unlike Dark Dimension, where you're just trying to get through it as quickly as you can, this is something where you're competing against everyone on a leaderboard. So basically, expect to rerun these nodes quite a bit. You're going to want to focus on setting up your cooldowns for the next node. That's going to be really important. So, just like you do in raids, but even more so in Dark Dimension, I would, get down to 2 or 3 characters left, and I would just be basicking over and over and over to just end with perfect cooldowns. And that is really going to happen here. You're going to be making sure you have everything ready to go. And sometimes that's going to be really important for certain nodes, that you can come out of the gate and slow certain characters and stun certain characters and prevent a lot of big damage that comes early on in the node. The other thing that you really want to do in a game mode like this is go slow and plot out your next move, because there's no timer. This is not like a raid node where you've only got a few minutes to get it done, or a war attack or something. You can just take all the time in the world. I would literally sometimes sit there and go to msf.gg and look at the kits of a particular character and try to think about how to do it. I didn't do that in this gameplay test, because I'm just blowing through it, just trying to get a sense of it to give you guys advice. But, certainly in Dark Dimension, I do that. I would expect that you'll end up doing this here. If you finally rerun this RNG 100 times, you finally get the dodge, the series of dodges that you need, you're going to be really careful, because you don't want to toss that run aside. You're going to want to keep that one, and so you're going to probably be going slow and really thinking it through. There are some really important differences, though, between this game mode and Dark Dimension, and the most important of which is that there's no healing. First of all, that means that you're going to actually want to heal your characters up by the end of the node. In other words, in Dark Dimension, if your characters are at half health at the end of the node, it's no big deal. It's at the end of the world. You use those Dark Dimension packs or whatever, a few cores, and you heal them up. Here, you're not able to do that. And so if your character dies, they're dead. If your character's at half health at the end of the node, they're going to be half health at the next node. So what it really means is you cannot rely on one team to carry you through an entire section. You're not, when you do Dark Dimension, right? You're gearing up, let's say you're one team of 5 in teal gear, and you're just going to run that through City, and that's it. That's the only teal characters that you got for City. It's not going to be like that here. You're going to have a lot of characters available. You're going to have your full roster available within restrictions. And so what that's going to actually mean is you're going to use burner teams. So, for example, the first couple nodes are heroes. There's a lot of heroes in this game. So you can just blow through and toss teams at it. As long as you don't think you're going to need the teams later, and often you're not, you can just throw teams at it to get particular characters down or things like that. You can also prep cooldowns on one node and then bring that character back on a later node. I'm going to make notes of that as we go through the different nodes and teams and characters to use. To give you an example, Doom is global and villain. So, for example, you can prep Doom's cooldowns in global and use them in villain. Same with Emma Frost. Same with Lady Deathstrike. You can do, characters that are hero and global, right? So you could have the Secret Avengers. You could prep cooldowns in hero and use them again in global. So what you're going to really want to do, since you can use a wide variety here of your roster, and you've got 10 nodes in the Scourge event, is you're going to want to plan out which characters you're going to need for each node. You need to make sure you have the characters that you're going to need to get through the full run. And so what you're going to want to do is think, okay, I'm going to need these characters for node 7, these characters for node 8, these characters for node 3, and kind of plot it out so you don't blow the characters you need later on early on in the early nodes. All right, now I'm going to just get to what I'm going to call big takeaways. In other words, here's the bottom line. Like, why am I watching this video? What do I want to learn? Here's my kind of big picture thoughts on this node, or this game mode, I should say. If you have a narrow roster, you're probably going to need to invest in additional characters if you want a larger legendary. In other words, if your goal is just to get through the milestones, you're going to be fine. I mean, I think if you get through difficulty 7, which is not crazy, I mean, you'll need to have web warriors or something to get there that far. You're going to be able to get, through the milestones. And I think, most end game players are going to unlock this character. In other words, if you're level 85 and you're in the Doom raids of some kind, you're going to be able to unlock the legendary. The issue, though, is if you're just not happy with the bare minimum, and I think a lot of people won't, then you're going to potentially have to invest in additional characters because there's just not that many good villains in the game, for example. Some of them are also in global. You're going to have to ultimately do that. And as I talk about later, you're going to probably have to invest in the Web Warriors and the Dark Hunters. I think, and to get to that point here, trying to muddle through without both the Web Warriors and the Dark Hunters is going to cost you. Remember, as I said, there's no healing. So I know that some of you have been asking me in my Discord in recent weeks, well, do you think I can just build a massive Web Warriors and ignore the Dark Hunters and just get through with just Web Warriors? Somebody told me it was a great idea. And I said my prediction was that Scopely was going to make it so that was not going to work for you, and I was right. And basically, the way they did it, I thought maybe what they do is make one of the nodes have tons of anti-dodge and another node have lots of cleanse or whatever. And they didn't do it that way. They basically just made it so that node 5 and node 10, which are the Web Warrior Dark Hunter nodes, are the toughest nodes. And node 10 in particular is really tough. And you basically, if you don't use a SAC team or you don't have 2 teams on that node, you're going to do a lot worse. And it's going to be hard to get through. So that's kind of how they did that. And so as I said, those are the toughest nodes by design. Nodes 5, node 10, those are the nodes that Web Warriors and Dark Hunters are the only characters you can bring in. Node 10 in particular has just got a lot going on right at the very beginning. It's just, maybe you could run it a bazillion times with just one team and just get through on pure RNG. Maybe, maybe not. I think you're going to have a lot easier time if you've got 9 characters as opposed to 5. And just in general, though, this is going to require a lot of grinding for perfect RNG. The reality of the situation is that if everybody's trying to get the best score possible, and some people are able to run these nodes 1,000 times a day, you can get through this thing in less than an hour. And so even if you take your time in it. And so realistically, what I just anticipate is that there's going to be some people who are going to run this several times a day, at the very least, over 10 days, and are going to get to a point where, they have literally the perfect run just because they've rerun the same turns over and over and over and over again to get the perfect dodge, that sort of thing. And I think that realistically, if you're not willing to do that, you're going to pay a price here. I don't think that's good game design. I don't think that's good for the player base. In other words, I think this is going to get boring. It certainly got boring for those of us who are screwing around with us over the weekend, just testing in it. In other words, running the same node over and over again is not fun after a period of time. But for better or for worse, that's what they've decided to do. Ultimately, I think this game mode is going to reward endgame players with huge rosters. Somebody like me, I'm gonna stream this the day it comes out, and you're gonna see I can just throw in some of these nodes team after team after team. I've got everything built. I got tons of gear. That's not going to be a problem for me. This is the sort of thing I think those players, players that have those sort of rosters are going to be in an easy position. Whereas I think this will be a struggle for players who have gone very narrow. If you've gone raid only, if you're very focused on just a core set of characters, I think this is a harder game mode by design. I think what Scopely wants to do is force you to invest in characters that you otherwise wouldn't want to invest in. And so I just think if you want a legendary that is bigger than the minimum, you may be in a position where you're going to have to invest in Lady Deathstrike, or you're going to have to, invest in, Emma or Shuri, whatever characters you may not have brought up as much. You may have to. Dark Hunters, you may not want to invest high in that team, but you may have to do it. And you're going to just face some tough choices as a result. So is this free-to-play friendly? I've been getting that question a lot. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I'll just give you my impressions. I think if your goal is to unlock the legendary at low stars, you're in luck. I think that, yes, I do. If you're a player that was not going to get the legendary for 2 runs anyway, now you might get it at 3 stars, fairly early on the first or second run. That's great. But I think ultimately this game mode is going to require a wide investment that's going to favor endgame players and obviously people who whale out on the game. That's just the reality. And you can make up that investment to an extent with grinding. In other words, yes, if you just have a Web Warriors team, for example, and you run the node 1,000 times, and there's somebody else who's got Dark Hunters as well, and they run it twice, maybe you can outdo that person, but realistically, they're going to have a lot easier time than you, and so you're going to fall behind if you try to do this with a narrow roster. And I think this is not going to get easier over time because the participant pool is going to stay large. Only 500 players are going to get a 7-star legendary in the first run. It is hard capped at 500, no matter how many people try to get that. And so, with, let's say, Omega Red, a lot of players could get 7-star legendary if they wanted to. And, the unlimited number of players, if they wanted to, could have spent or done whatever they were going to do, cored out to get a 5-star legendary 6, 7. It's not going to be like that this time. So I think the player pool will be large. And I actually think, by the way, that the difficulty will stay high over time. I'll talk a little more about that later. All right, let's start going through the nodes. I'm going to go through each of the nodes, talk to you a little bit about them. I'm not going to break down, watch for this character, watch for this move. That video would take forever, but I'm going to talk to you about characters to use and bottom line takeaways. The heroes nodes are the first 2 nodes. You can use any heroes, and just their easiest nodes in the entire in the entire game mode, given the wide variety of characters are available. I mean, there's so many great heroes in the game. So it's pretty easy. You can just use the Eternals. You don't really need them in Cosmic, in my opinion, because you have so many options in Cosmic as well. And so what you can do is just use the Eternals. But there's tons of amazing choices. You can use the new Warriors because you really can't use Cloak and Dagger later. I mean, there's no city nodes. And so as a practical matter, unless you want to use Death Pool and Cosmic, which you won't really need her, the new Warriors are kind of freebies here. The Secret Avengers you will need in Global. So if you do use them here, you're going to need to not only have them at full health, but you're going to want to prep their cooldowns for Global. So I do think that they're really important there. The Young Avengers, and they could be a SAC team if you need them, depending on how big they are. They have some sustainability. Heroes for Hire, you can also use them as a SAC team, right? These are all hero teams. Kestrel, Silver Surfer, T'Challa, Shuri, and Yo-Yo, these are all heroes. I will say Kestrel, Silver Surfer, and T'Challa, I'm not sure how much you're going to need them in Cosmic. I have a big Infinity Watch team. I imagine a lot of you do. You end up using them in Cosmic. But even putting them to the side, Shuri and Yo-Yo are a fantastic combo in any game mode because Shuri gives defense up, Yo-Yo gives offense down, and so the defense up gives you 50% less incoming damage, and then offense down has 50% less damage for the enemy. So if you have a big Shuri and Yo-Yo, that can be a really good combo. They're also useful in Global, so you have to think about prepping their cooldowns, having them ready as well if you want to use them there. So Global, like I said, there's a lot of overlap between Hero and Global. You have to think that through. Global, of course, much more restrictive than Hero. And Secret Avengers is just really great here. The sustainability of that team is important. They'll really keep all of your characters healed up. And that you're going to want to have some characters that you're going to use later in villains if you're doing this right. So to me, Secret Avengers are an obvious choice here. And then really Doom, Omega Red, and Lady Deathstrike are great to use, but they're also important in the villain nodes. And I think villain's pretty restrictive, so you're going to have to be really careful when you use them. You're going to have to prep their cooldowns and so on. In other words, if you use Doom and you do really well in nodes 3 and 4, you take down a difficulty you didn't expect, but your Doom is dead, or your Doom's almost dead, or your Doom's gotten all its cooldowns are not up. And then you got to go into the villain nodes in that situation. It can almost be counterproductive. You'll need to start over. Other choices you could take a look at for Global include, Sabretooth, Sinister, and Emma Frost, which you can also use in villain. Like I said, you really need to be careful about, how you leave those characters because it can restrict your options in the villain section. Wolverine's an option. You can just toss him in there. He does pretty good damage. Red Guardian is a Global character. If you have him built to, definitely can take some hits and provide some healing. Yo-Yo and Shuri, like I said, if you have Shuri special prep from nodes 1 and 2, so she can get that defense up in the beginning, they can be very nice for the reasons I said earlier. And that's really it. I mean, I didn't find, I don't think those nodes are that difficult. Node 5 is where things start changing. And in my opinion, nodes 5 and 10 are what this event is all about. I mean, they basically made it so this is going to be the challenge. And I will say I wasn't sure going into this whether that was going to be the case. I speculated maybe node 2 or node 7 or something they'd make really hard. But they didn't do that here. But they really made these two nodes challenging. What I'll say about node 5 is, Web Warriors seem to me like the best choice to go in first in a node like this, because there's a lot of RNG with Web Warriors. We all know they dodge like crazy. You can just literally rerun it over and over. Like, see, turn 1, oh, he didn't dodge, just start over. Okay, now he's dodged turn 1, but turn 2, I got hit. And they do hit really hard at the higher difficulty, so you just, keep rerunning them till you get the right dodges and RNG. You do need to decide your strategy for node 10, though, before you start node 5. In other words, these are the only 2 nodes where you don't have a ton of choices, right? In other words, you don't have a lot of different characters to work from. You've only got 9 characters total at most if you have them all built. And so you really need to figure out what you're going to do for node 10. And so what you're going to want to do for node 10 is you're either going to want to bring in a 4-person SAC team, and which is probably the right way to go, and then bring in a full 5-person team later, or you do the opposite. You bring in a full 5-person team, get as far as you can, and then use the 4-person team to clean up. But you're going to want to figure that out in advance because you're going to need to prep the cooldowns you'll need for the last node. In other words, you need to figure out which of which characters you really want to have ready for node 10, and you either don't want to use those characters in this node, or you need to have their cooldowns prepped. So, for example, if you're gonna just on the last node, you're like, okay, I'll just toss the other Web Warriors in as a sack team, but I'm gonna keep one of the Web Warriors with Dark Hunters. Then I'd pick like Ghost Spider or OG Spidey and make sure that that character is at full health with all their cooldowns prepped. Or alternatively, you're like, okay, I'm going to run Dark Hunters here, and I really care about Web Warriors for the last node, and I'm just going to run a Dark Hunter there. I think Ghost Rider or Morbius, probably Ghost Rider, but I could see an argument for Morbius, are fine, being kind of a solo character that kind of works with the Web Warriors to an extent. And you could basically have their cooldowns up, have them at full health, and use the others, the others on their own. For example, if you want to sub out Spider-Punk, who outside of raids isn't so good, you could toss him in with the three Dark Hunters and just be like whatever, and then run Ghost Rider or Morbius if you want to try to do that. Okay, something like that. If you're like, okay, my Dark Hunters are spent, but I want to keep, they're in bad shape, but I want to keep at least one of them with good cooldowns, you could do it that way. All right, villains are the next two nodes. To me, these are the nodes that, aside from to me, there's different cost levels for this event. And in other words, one of the kind of costs of admission is having Dark Hunters and Web Warriors. So you have two different teams. And obviously, by the way, they're not even full teams. There's only 4 Dark Hunters. I'm talking about which Dark Hunter you could use with Web Warriors, but that's just like if your team's kind of spent, right? So, but past that baseline of admission, villain to me seems like the spot where there's going to be mid-game players or players who are, maybe they're free to play, but they're in the end game kind of, they're gonna struggle because there are not a lot of good villains in this game right now, and there's really only a few, and there can be hard to get, right? The best villain in the game is Dormammu. It's not going to surprise you that he's really good. But if you don't have Dormammu, most people don't, almost no one does, this is going to make the villain section a lot harder for you. So by the way, so that means you may not want to give up on DD5 because eventually you're going to want to be running this event at some point in the future, even if you're not going hard on it now, right? But obviously the other stars of the show are Doom and Omega Red. The issue, of course, is that first of all, not everyone has a big Omega Red, and a lot of people still don't have him unlocked. But nonetheless, those are only 2 characters. Who are you going to put around them? You can't just have those 2 characters. And so, that lineup is more limited. Not all of you are going to have them built. One character that I expect that most of you are going to have built, or many of you have built, is Lady Deathstrike, just because she's so good in the tech notes and the Doom Raid. If you don't, you may need to do that for this event as part of the cost of admission, so to speak. But there's others, right? Sabretooth, Emma Frost, Hela, Zemo, Sinister, Doc Ock, so Heartless. So those are the other obvious choices to me. Heartless I don't think is going to be a problem for people because you're going to want to build him up for the new arena team. But, how many of you have a lot of shards for Heartless after this campaign event? How many of you have had the Mystic Gear to bring him up when you're already spending Mystic Gear on Dark Hunters? These, like I said, this is why Scopely's doing it this way, to force you to, spend gear you wouldn't otherwise spend to get up your Sinister, get up your Hela, whatever it might be, or to, for example, invest in a character you might not otherwise, or potentially even whale out on shards or gear. All right, Cosmic, good news. Just use Infinity Watch. This isn't that hard. Didn't really. This is just, from what I could see and from talking to other people, it seems like that's basically what everyone did. It's an obvious choice if you're in Cosmic, because most people have a big Infinity Watch. If you have to, you can clean up with characters like Dormammu, Kestrel, the Eternal, Surfer, T'Challa, X-Factor. There's plenty of characters, right, that fit the bill in Cosmic, but it's probably not going to be necessary. So You're probably going to be able to get through with Infinity Watch. You can test it yourself. The good and bad news, you're going to be able to run this over and over again to figure this out for yourselves soon enough, but that would be my initial thought. So let's, and it doesn't really seem to need a burner team. You just need to sort of, manage your cooldowns and so on. All right, let's talk about node 10. So bad news, this is the hardest node in the entire event, in my opinion. So, and that's set up that way, right? So then, forces you to be in a spot where you have to plan for it, and you got to carefully get everything ready for that, and also make sure you have both of these teams built up. So now, it used to be you only had to build one team to get a legendary, and they would make it farmable. Now they have two teams. Dark Hunters in particular, not super farmable, right? Not obtainable, very easy to obtain in events. And you basically need both to succeed well here. And so I just think you're going to have a huge advantage if you have both teams built up for the reasons we've already discussed. Can you get through with just Web Warriors at a lower difficulty? Yeah, if they're overbuilt, yeah, sure. If you brought your entire Web Warrior team to DD5 and they're all in teal gear and they're big stars and you're going on a lower difficulty, yeah, you might be able to get away with it. But it's just obviously it's harder. Because if one of your characters dies, you can't use them on the next node. You can go in, by the way, without a full team here, but it's harder, right, to go in with 4 characters instead of 5. And really, as I said before, the strategy here is going to be 4 characters as a burn team, and then using the other 5 altogether. And so if you and as I said before, to me the obvious thing to do is just you've got 4 Dark Hunters, so you might as well just keep one Web Warrior alive that runs, that you're going to run with the Dark Hunters, and then you got the other 4 Web Warriors. The other way of doing it, of course, is if you think that one of the Web Warriors isn't strong, let's say Punk or something like that, you can throw Ghost Rider or Morbius in with them if you want to have a super team, and then just use the other ones as a pure sack. But in any event, in my opinion, you're going to waste your run if you don't plan for node 10. You basically have to put yourself in a position where you have a team or teams. You're really going to ideally have 9 characters that you can use to tackle this node. And I think they did that by design. All right, so here's my overall predictions. I'll end with this. My predictions for this event, I think, most experienced players are going to unlock Morgan. I think that's a good thing for the game. But of course, the question is how big of an unlock. I think the competition for the 7-star Morgans are going to drive it just a ton of spending and overinvestment in characters. It's going to be one of these things where people are throwing teal gear left and right and wailing out and doing whatever because they want to be one of those 50 with the biggest Morgan or one of the 500. And, that's why Scopely's doing this. I think the real pressure point, though, and the hardest people hit here are going to be mid-game players. I think if they want something more than the bare minimum, they're going to feel a real crunch. It's like, oh my God, I don't have all these villains and global and everything all built out. And, I just got to build, some of these characters, right? Or, they weren't planning to build Dark Hunters, but it's just really hard without them. And they've run it several times and they're just they're banging their head against the wall on node 10 and they're going to do what they got to do, right? And I just think practically speaking, you're probably going to need both teams unless you want to have a lot of RNG. I just think node 10 is going to be tough unless you really are just, very cool with accepting a much smaller legendary. I think the biggest inflection point in terms of getting a bigger legendary here will probably be having both Web Warriors and Dark Hunters. That's at least my initial impression. I understand that this can change, but that's my initial sense of things here. Okay. And I don't think the event's going to get easier over time because what's going to happen here is, first of all, you're only going to have 500 people graduating from the first event to the second. They purposely made it so it's going to take quite some time for players to graduate out of this, and constantly new players are going to enter it. So there's going to always be a pretty big pool of players in this event. And then they've made it so the difficulty levels scale with the players. So, other events got easier over time because, hey, we have ISO and different gear and different characters. So, over time, it can be that it's much easier to get your X-Force that you need to get Doc Ock or that sort of thing. But But with this event, it'll just keep scaling with the players. So as new villains get added to the game, all the players in the player base and on the leaderboard are going to have those villains. And so ultimately, I think that this is an event that it's going to remain difficult for quite some time in the future. And that's exactly what Scopely wants. They want to keep driving spending over time. And that's how this game mode is designed. It is what it is. But hopefully I gave you some tips that can make this a little bit more manageable here. I will be streaming this event. I'm going to be doing a lot of Scourge runs over the upcoming week. So definitely check out my Twitch stream for that. That is linked below. So if you like this video, smash that like button. Subscribe to this channel. If you got comments, questions, cheers, jeers, happy, sad, angry, mad, put it all below. I'll take all the criticism. You can also go to my Discord, which is linked below. We're going to definitely do a lot of discussion there. We're going to set up a channel to discuss the Scourge event. And then, of course, we also have my Twitch stream where you can watch me stream it live. That is linked below as well.